What's going on, guys? This is Alex with House of Shades Barbershop, and today we did a slick back men's haircut with a fade on the sides. I'm going to show you how I used clipper over comb and texturizing to really blend this hair in with the sides. This is actually a pretty difficult haircut, so if you stick around to the end, you're going to see exactly how I worked my way through this, and hopefully you guys learned something. So here it is, check it out. So to start this haircut off, I'm using the Wahl Senior cordless clippers, and I have the lever all the way open. We usually call this a half because it's a little bit less than a half guard, but it's definitely more than a skin fade. And this is probably one of the most important parts of the haircut, because when you're establishing your initial guideline, you really have to be careful to make sure that it's even on both sides of the head, because otherwise you'll end up with an uneven fade. So when you make sure you turn the client around during this step, and I like to use my mirror when I'm doing this step, because it really helps me to make sure I can see both sides at the same time, make sure the fade's even. So for the next step of this haircut, I'm using the number 1 guard, and I have the lever all the way open for this step. And the reason why I like to do this is because it gets some of the bulk out of the way. So I'm creating my next guideline by going up about ½ inch up the side of the client's head. And what that's doing is it's basically just getting rid of the bulk. I'm not fading yet. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go around the entire side of the client's head using the number 1 guard open. And then once I finish that step, I'm gonna start to fade underneath and start to erase that first line we made with the clipper lever all the way open. So now that we finished that step, I close the lever with my number 1 guard, and I'm fading right underneath the last guideline that I just made. And the goal of this step is start to erase that first guideline that we made in the very beginning of the haircut. Once you finish with the number 1 guard closed all the way around the head, there's still going to be a little bit of a line, and that's where the half guard comes in. The half guard is designed to get in between no guard and the number 1. So there should be no lines after this step. And keep in mind, when you're using the half guard, I just like to use the corners most of the time because I'm always afraid of going too high. So I highly recommend using the corners whenever using that half guard. So now that we've erased our first guideline, it's time to create a new one, because I'd never try to create a new guideline without erasing the first one that we made. So here I got the number 2 guard, I got the lever all the way closed, and I'm creating a new line. And this is actually another really important part of the haircut, because like I mentioned earlier, we are trying to save as much bulk as we can up near that crown area of the client's head, because we're going to need some length there to blend the top into. Otherwise it's just going to look like a mohawk. So we definitely don't, that's not the look that the client's going after. So I'm being careful when I get to the top of the client's head to scoop out and make sure I'm leaving enough length there, so that way when I do clipper over comb later, I'll have something to connect the sides to. And the next step is just to take the 1.5 guard and work right underneath that line that you created with the number 2 guard. This guard is going to work really nicely to erase that line that's in between the number 1 guard open and the number 2 guard closed. So that's why the 1.5 guard is so important. Highly recommend having this tool in your arsenal. It's one of the most important guards that you can use along with the half guard. So now it's time to start connecting the sides with the top of the head. And one of my favorite techniques to do this is clipper over comb. And the reason why I like this technique so much is because it eliminates having to use guards to do this work. And also it prevents you from going too high with the fade, because you have a lot more control. Once you get comfortable doing this technique, you have a lot more control in how much hair you're taking off. So to do this, I'm resting the bottom of the cone, or the spine as they call it, on the side of the client's head, while you raising the top of the comb towards me at a 45-degree angle. Sometimes I use more of an angle, sometimes I use less, but you have to use whatever angle is gonna blend that hair. But really, in this step, we are not blending. It's more like it's removing bulk, because what I have found after doing clip over comb for years is that this technique is great for removing bulk, but it's not so good at fading. And the reason why is because these combs, they're not that great at picking up all the hair. Like, there's gonna, if you only do clipper over comb and for a haircut, you're gonna find after the client takes a shower, there's a ton of stray hairs. So I'm just gonna use this to remove bulk and then use the guards to clean up after. So now that most of the clipper over comb work is done, as you can see, there's still a lot of work to be done with the fade, but now I can actually see what I'm doing now that that hair is out of the way. So I'm going back to my guards. I'm using the number 3 guard in this case to start removing a little bit more of that bulk, so that way we can really detail the sides of this blend. So for this step, it's pretty much the same as before. I established my last guide with the number 3. We did some clipper over comb, and now I'm just working underneath that area that we just did with the number 2 guard, and I'm really trying to smooth out this blend and eliminate any dark spots. Once I'm done with that number 2 guard, I'm gonna switch back to my 1.5 guard, and I have it open right now, but sometimes I'll go between open and close because you don't want to take off too much. So it's always better to start with the lever open and then work your way down if you need to take off more. So once you finish with the guards, the next step is to grab your clipper and do a little bit more clipper over comb before you move on to the top and start working with the length on the top. Now once you got the sides where you like them, it's time to start sectioning off the hair on the top. And I'll be honest, I don't do this with every haircut. In fact, I don't do this with most haircuts just because it's not really necessary. But in this case, this is a very precise haircut that we're trying to achieve, and the client wanted a very specific look. So we section off the hair to make sure that the hair flows exactly where he wants it. And that's pretty much what I'm doing in this part here. Now, in most cases, I typically cut straight across, and that's how you see a lot of other barbers cut. But in this case, the client really liked it the way his hair flows and combs when there's a little bit more texture added to the haircut. And in my opinion, point cutting is one of the best ways to add texture to a cut. Basically because you're purposely making the ends of the hair just a little bit uneven rather than having a perfectly straight line. That little bit of unevenness actually breaks up the lines in the haircut and makes it look a lot more natural. So point cutting is a very good technique for giving the clients that texture look that they want. Just make sure to be careful. I mean, I almost cut myself a few times doing this during this haircut, so don't cut your finger when you're doing this, guys, but you need to practice in order to get better at it. And I guarantee you, if you do this with every few haircuts, you'll get better and your clients will really like it too. So now we're done cutting the top, and the length has pretty much been established. And now my goal is to really start focusing on how that top flows into the sides. So right here, I'm doing a little bit of scissor over comb, still point cutting, but I'm really trying to make sure that there's nothing hanging over and that everything is blended nicely. So now we pretty much finished with all the scissor work, and I'm back with my clippers working on the sides. And this is pretty much the detailing part of the haircut. I save this always for the very end. You know, we start with taking off the bulk, getting the fade to about 80% of where we want it to be. Then we connect the length on top, and now I go back to the sides and make sure that everything is smooth. There's no stray hairs there. There's no dark spots, no lines. So I'm just gonna start working my way down using every guard that I used in my previous steps and just fading down, making sure that there's no more lines or dark spots. That way when we look at this fade from the side, it'll be a nice and smooth transition. Now for this part of the haircut, I decided to use my texturizing shears with my comb in order to lighten up these dark spots that I saw in the haircut. And now this is one of my favorite techniques for eliminating dark spots or lightening up lines without raising the fade any higher. So if you find yourself taking your fades too high, this is a good technique to use. Now for the last step of this haircut, I'm going to be outlining the hairline of the client, and then I'm going to be tapering his neckline, and then he should be good to go. To start this neck taper, what I'm going to be doing first is using my trimmers. I'm going to be erasing the bottom line, the very bottom line of his hairline, and that's going to be creating the initial guideline that I'm going to use to start fading up from there. So when you taper a neckline, there shouldn't be any hair left at the bottom of the fade. It should just blend naturally into the client's hair. And once you finish that step with the trimmers, you move on to your clippers, starting with the lever closed, going up about quarter to half an inch at a time and slowly opening the lever until it blends into the client's hair. And that's pretty much the whole haircut. If you made it this far, definitely hit that like button if you learned anything. Subscribe if you want to see more videos like this in the future. If you have some ideas on what kind of content you want to see, let me know in the comments. I'll be more than happy to make videos in the future with stuff that you guys are really interested in seeing. Until then, my name is Alex with House of Shaves Barbershop, and I'm out.